So this presentation is on automating statistical copy going from SPSS into Microsoft Word using APA formats. And basically, I want to go over the logic and give an example of how this works. So briefly, there is the copy of the slides. This link will let you download a PDF of these slides. And let me just paste that into the chat box for you guys. Uh-oh, where'd it go? Here is the link for you. And as we go through, you can follow along. You can also, of course, take notes in whatever way is preferable to you, but in case you want to copy, there it is. Now, the goals of this presentation are to help you adhere to APA format as you go through your data analysis for any research project, whether it's a dissertation or any research project where you have data and you need to report them in APA format. It also is designed so that you can avoid transcription errors. So if you're doing this by hand, if you're creating tables or writing up results or anything that involves copying numbers, it's not inevitable, but it's likely that mistakes can happen. So if you kind of automate the process and just copy-paste information, you avoid those errors altogether. And it also helps you decrease workload. So there's nothing worse than getting a huge headache from trying to, create a table from scratch. With the tools that we have at hand, this can be automated to some extent. It's not fully automatic, but it can definitely decrease workload. So that's what this is all about. So when we go into the actual meat and potatoes of this presentation, we'll see how you can go from SPSS into Word via Excel. Now, all three of these are necessary. You might say, well, why can't I just skip Excel? And the reason is that Excel has a lot of functions that Word doesn't, especially when it comes to consolidating multiple cells into one, and we'll see examples of this. And also formatting tables can be done in Word, but it's easier if you start the process out in Excel and then simply copy an almost finished table into Word and then just apply small little tweaks like making things italicized or underlined. That kind of thing Word can handle. But definitely Excel is a very important step here. So you need all three pieces of software really, which you should have, especially SPSS, you should have access to that through the Chicago School. If not, shoot me an email once this is done and I'll show you the link for how to download and install SPSS if you haven't already. And finally, this presentation applies to both descriptive and inferential statistics. So if you're trying to, for example, describe a sample in terms of, okay, what's the average age, or what's the breakdown of a certain score on a test of, say, post-traumatic stress according to gender, or whatever the case may be, you can describe your sample using numbers, and we'll look at an example of that. And it also applies to inferential statistics. So if you're running a correlation or a t-test or multiple regression, we'll go through a very straightforward example, and you can apply these principles that I'll show you to any kind of statistical analysis that you could do. And of course, right, so this applies to both tables and prose, because if we're looking at, describing a sample, typically you would have a table, but if you're saying, okay, this group was significantly higher on measure X than this other group, then you would probably include that in the prose. I've got my colleague Jamie Patterson here, and she is a dissertation writing expert for NCAID. So Dr. Patterson, if you have anything you want to add along the way, as we spoke about, please just go ahead and chime in. And we can kind of flesh things out a little bit. If anyone has questions, certainly we can help tackle those together. So,
thank you.
Of course, of course. So now, all this overview aside, let's look at an example of an APA formatted table. This is an example from the APA manual on page 130. you'll see that this is what is basically, again, a descriptive statistics table where you have this, was done on something regarding proportion of errors in younger and older groups, whatever that is. But anyway, you see that they have a younger group and an older group, and they give you, well, in their study, in this, sort of imaginary study, they have a level of difficulty variable, so they describe each sample, right? In the low difficulty group, there are 12 younger participants, and the M and SD stands for the mean and the standard deviation, meaning, I guess this is 5% errors with a standard deviation of 8%, and then you have the 95% confidence interval, which is a measure of the variability that could be expected within that sample. So this mean could be as low as 0.02 or as high as 0.11, meaning 2% errors or 11% errors. And you can see that they did this for every single group, right? Everybody who was in the moderate level of difficulty, broken down by younger and older participants, and everybody that was in the high level of difficulty, again, broken down by younger and older age groups. So all in all, this is the end product that you would have in a journal article, a dissertation, or any kind of research report that you could be preparing. And essentially, what we need to do is take our raw data, right? Here they have data from, close to 80 people that has been boiled down into 3 lines of information, right? So it's not an easy task, but for the readers that are going to be trying to digest this information, you can't just say, here's a whole bunch of data, you do the work, right? It's up to you as the author to turn this into something that's easily digestible for your audience. So that's what we're going to do sort of step by step. Not using these data, using a different set of data, but the numbers themselves don't matter. It's the process of how you get to this end result. So we have a few different elements here. The first is you have this table number and a title. So here it's table X. If you've got 10 tables in your paper, then this could be table 1, table 2, so on and so forth. And the title, as you can see, is italicized, right? That is one piece of APA formatting that's required. You've got a border underneath that. You see that sort of horizontal line there. You've got partial borders. Anytime in a table that you've got multiple groups being compared, you see that they each have this piece of underlining that is separated by this gap here, right? And that's just meant to say, okay, well, everything for the younger folks or the younger group goes under this, piece of underlining here, and everything for the older group goes under this underlining here. And that's not easy to do, believe it or not. It took me a while to figure this one out, but in any case, I'll save you the trouble. And then finally, you've got your data, which are aligned. You see that everything is left aligned here. These headings are actually centered, but everything in here, you see how nice and neat everything is, right? Everything is nice and consistent. Nothing is sort of wonky. All the commas are in the same place. All the brackets are in the same place. Everything is aligned. And then, whoops, finally, I guess I don't have that in here, but again, you've got another border, so to speak, here. And then some tables will have notes. Some don't. Depending on what information is contained in there, it will be appropriate to include a note, especially if there are somewhat uncommon acronyms, such as a CI. M and SD is a common term. It stands for mean and standard deviation in parentheses. And according to APA guidelines, if you have common nomenclature, you don't go to the trouble of explaining what it stands for. So similarly, a lowercase n stands for the number of participants, right? That should be self-explanatory that it's sample size. And if you didn't know, now you know. So, okay, that's all well and good. We know what the elements are. We have to get this table into this kind of form. However, when you are conducting an analysis and using SPSS in particular, which is what we use at the Chicago School, we don't use R or SAS or anything like that, we use SPSS, you might get data that look like this. So here, what I asked SPSS to do is give me descriptive statistics for 4 variables. There's a reading score, a writing score, a math score, and a science score. This is from a token data set that I typically use to run examples on. It's high school data from something like 200 students, and it's publicly available. It's called HSV2. If you Google HSV2, you should be able to find a copy of it. If you want a copy, certainly email me and I'll shoot it over to you. But basically what we have here is data for males. You see there's a variable in this data set called female, and that variable actually just pertains to the sex of the students. So you've got males here and you've got females here. So this is the format that SPSS kind of spits out at you, and you know, you have to turn this into something that's APA formatted. So how do you do that, right? That's the whole point of this presentation. So the first thing I want to do is obtain these pieces of output in SPSS. That's the very first step, right? So I already have SPSS open, and like I said, I already have the data set at my disposal. And so this is what I think, right? It's a whole bunch of variables. Again, we've got that female variable, which is 0 is male, 1 is female, and then we've got race, socioeconomic status, school type. I forget what PROG stands for. I can go into variable view, and PROG is type of program, which means general, academic, or vocational. Fine. We've also got our 4 dependent variables. Actually, there's 5. I omitted the 5th one just for, you know, I guess 4 is enough already. But in any case, we've got these 4 variables that we're going to be looking at, and what we want to do is get those descriptive variables. In my study, my hypothetical study, I'm interested in how males and females compare on reading, writing, math, and science scores. All right, for whatever reason, that's what I decided is important to collect data on. So let's imagine I collected data, this is what I got, and now I want to see what's going on. So if I want to actually collect data on males and females separately, whoopsie, what I need to do is split my file up according to gender. So to do that, I would go to Data, Split File. This window pops up, and then you say I can organize output by groups, and then it says, okay, groups based on what? I want to do it based on this female variable, right? Okay, so I do that, click OK. Sometimes it's better to use the paste function. I'm not going to go into too much depth on that, but this is our output that we get. So right now SPSS tells me, okay, I've split the file according to female. And now what I want to do is I want to get my descriptive statistics. So I go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and collect some frequencies. Now this window pops up, and okay, what I want to analyze, I want those 4 variables of reading, writing, math, and science. And statistics I want, this window pops up, and for my purposes, these are continuous variables, right? So the score can go from 0 to 100. So for this type of variable, I want the mean and the standard deviation, right? This is the standard form of reporting a continuous variable. There are exceptions. If you have a variable that's violating statistical assumptions, sometimes people will report the median. If you're going to be doing any kind of inferential statistics, you sometimes want to know the skewness and the kurtosis. For the sake of this presentation, that's all too in-depth. You can certainly check all of these and get that information. For example, if you wanted to report the range, you could do that, or the minimum and maximum, you could report that. But to keep it simple for the purposes of this presentation, I'm only going to select the mean and standard deviation. Okay, so hit continue. I don't really want frequency tables right now. I just want the tables that popped out. So here they are, right? We've got our 2 pieces of information, one for males, one for females. The label of this variable is kind of confusing. These are not, you know, transgender individuals. It's just that the name of the variable in the data set is female. And, you know, it might as well be called sex or gender, right? Where gender equals male and gender equals female here. So anyway, don't let that throw you. Next up, we have our SPSS data ready to go. But again, this is not APA formatted. right? So what we need to do is pop this into Excel, and so I need to fire up Excel here. Give me a blank workbook. And so now I've got two windows open, right? I've got SPSS here and I've got Excel here. What I want to snag is this table first. I want to copy that. And then I'm not actually just going to paste this into Excel. Here's a little trick that when I learned this, I kind of lost my mind. But anyway, I'll show you what it does. So here's the raw sort of SPSS version, right? We see that it looks exactly, well, not exactly, but the same format as the SPSS data. What I can also do is I can take this entire table, copy it within Excel, and now I click in an empty cell and I now use this little icon. Depending on the version of Excel that you have, it's going to look a little bit different, but basically it's this transpose function that you want. And all that this does is it rotates the data by 90 degrees. And I'll show you why this is important in a minute, but for now, just bear with me. You transpose the data. And what it did is you'll see that before we had reading, writing, math, and science going across the top. Now they're going down in this first column. So all my means are sort of one on top of the other. All my standard deviations are one on top of the other instead of being sideways. And this is going to become important when we try to take all this information and automatically turn it into an APA formatted table. So that's what we need to do for that. And then similarly, we need to do the same thing for the females. So we copy this. I'm going to paste it right next door here. I'm going to copy it again and then just transpose it down here. Okay. Now I've got all my data sort of in the format that I'm going to need. Okay, now before I lose my place, let me go back to a PowerPoint real quick. So we've got our data in Excel. We split the file up, right? We went to Data, Split File, chose the variable, and clicked Organize by Groups. We obtained our descriptive statistics, and then we pasted the output into Excel, right? And we use that little transpose function. So that's how far we've gotten so far. Then next up, in Excel, we've got a whole other set of steps that we need to follow. So I want to break that down bit by bit before I actually jump in with what is going to look a lot like chicken scratch. If you've never used Excel syntax, this is going to be new, but it actually looks more complicated than it is. So the first thing to know is that the equal sign is key in Excel. Anytime you want to tell Excel, look, I want to do something with some data, you tell it that you want the value in the cell that you're in to equal something. So you always start out with equals. And then there's this other function, this rounding function, that's going to be important for APA format because you always want to round off your numbers. You don't want to have a value, like if the mean of one group is like 10.1579248, you're not going to be reporting all of these, millionths of a percentage point, right? You want to round it off. So this rounding syntax allows you to do that. And I'll show you how to actually use it. But basically what you do is you type into Excel equals round, you open a parenthesis, you tell it what cell you want to round off, and then add a comma, and then the number of significant figures that you want. So we'll see how that works in a minute. And typically, according to the APA format, you want 2 significant figures. Sometimes it's different, and I'll let Dr. Patterson jump in here if there's anything that I'm missing here. But there are exceptions where if you have a very small number, especially with p-values, if you have a really small number, then you would say that it's less than a really small number, as opposed to, like, if the p-value is actually 0.000000007, you would just shorten that and say, look, p is less than 0.001. That's a really small p-value, so that's all you really need to know. Okay, so that's one piece. Another piece is that you want to be able to combine multiple cells into one. If you think back to that APA formatted table, they had the mean and the standard deviation in one cell. So Excel lets you do this very, very quickly by using the ampersand. So if you want to, in one cell, type in the contents of cell A1 and A2, and what I mean, what is A1 and A2 first of all? You see here that we've got A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so on and so forth, and the rows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way down. So if I want this particular value here, you see that we're in cell D12, right? So D12 has its value of 52.82, and that's the mean for the males' reading scores, right? And the standard deviation of the males' reading scores is in cell E12, right? So that's what I'm talking about. So A1 is all the way up here, right? This is cell A1, and A2 and A3 and so on and so forth. Okay, so when you want to combine the output from two cells, you just tell Excel, look, I want A1 and A2 together, so this is what you would tell it, A1 ampersand A2. And quotation marks are also a very handy feature here because what you can do is make combinations here. So let's take this command step by step by step. So I color coded it, right? So you can tell Excel, okay, look, equals A1, right? Give me that mean of that group, and this next piece here, it looks like, okay, quote, space, paren, quote, oh my God, my eyes are rolling in the back of my head. All that this is telling Excel is to take the contents of cell A1 and then follow it up with a space and opening a parenthesis. Anything that's inside these two quotation marks, you can type in whatever you want. In here, I just said, you know, space, paren. And what this will do is it will start to combine the contents of A1 and A2. So what I do is, after this parenthesis, then I want the standard deviation, right? So then I say, okay, and give me the contents of A2. And that's going to pop in that number that's in cell A2 or E12, whichever one you want. And then I want some more information, right? I want to close the parenthesis after the standard deviation, right? Just like in APA format, you have the mean, and then you have a parenthesis with the standard deviation inside, and that's it. So it's the contents of A1 followed by a space and opening a parenthesis, followed by the contents of cell A2, followed by closing a parenthesis. That's all that is. It's a lot of, you know, weird, funky text, but that's all we're doing. So hopefully I haven't, you know, made anybody's head explode with that. But if there are questions, please just let me know, and we'll go through it. Because odds are, if you're thinking it, somebody else is thinking it too. I've been doing this for years, and it's simply a matter of practice. Like, to me, I see this and I'm like, oh, okay, this is what this says. But I understand that for somebody who doesn't have this experience, this could be a little bit tricky. So by all means, if there are questions, just chime in at any time, please. Okay, so now I'm going to take it one step further, and I'm going to add another piece of information. And I'm going to tell it to round off my values, right? It's the same exact thing as here, just now I've added in this, this piece from up here, right? Where I tell Excel to round off my values to two significant figures. And the way that you do that is you say equals round, again, A1, it's the contents of cell A1 rounded off to two significant figures, and that little, you know, space and parenthesis, and a rounded off version of cell A2, and close the parenthesis. So this number 2 is just the number of significant figures, right? So if I said round A1 to three significant figures, then that's what it would give me, right? And we'll look at how that works in 1 minute. The last thing I want to show you is that there's this option. You don't have to type this out every single time you want to do this. That would be counterproductive because you'd just be doing a ton of work typing everything in over and over and over again. There's this drag function that Excel has, which is this little small black cross in the bottom right of each cell that allows you to take a formula and update it for as many rows as you want. And this is why it's important to transpose the data when you copy it. So let me show you how this all works sort of in practice, right? When you're in Excel, let me actually zoom in on this so that we just do one group at a time here. In fact, let's just do this. Okay, this will be easier. Okay, so we've got the males over here on the left, the females on the right. So what I want to do is I want the mean and standard deviation, right? So I'm just going to go to an empty cell here, and I'm going to say this cell is now going to be D12, right? And you see that Excel highlights that cell, okay? And it gives me that same exact value, right? But that's not APA format, right? This is 4 significant figures. I don't want that many. So I want to round this off, right? So I want to round D12 to how many? To 2. Oh, right. Okay, I forgot about this. So, yeah, right. Okay. If you have this kind of issue where it gives you these zeros, just go up here in Excel and you can remove those zeros. See how that works? You can just add as many as you want or get rid of them. So you don't want those zeros showing up. So that's the trick to kind of not have that happen. Okay, but I don't just want the mean, right? I want the standard deviation. So I have to tell it, okay, and what else? Well, space quote, and then I also want cell E12. Oops, again, I have to say and because that is the next thing I want. And then I want to close the parentheses, so I can do that. And again, of course, it takes that number, and this is, this is a very, from SPSS, this is like what SPSS actually calculates out. So we have a ton of significant figures, and as you can probably tell, this is not going to fly in terms of APA format. So again, I want to round E12 again to 2 significant figures, and there it is. Now keep in mind, just sort of so you see what I mean by all of this. Here I have this, parenthesis in quotation marks, but I can type in, whatever I want. And you see that that's what it does. But of course, I don't want all this crazy text. I just want a space and a parenthesis. Notice that there's a space here, right? If I didn't have the space and I just added the parenthesis, then I need to, rethink that, because in APA format, you need that space in between the mean and the standard deviation. So that's why in those quotation marks, you need that extra space there. Now, the last step, right? Remember I said there's this little black square in the bottom right. When you take notice the cursor, it's this sort of thick white plus sign, right? But when you hover over that bottom right corner, it turns into this skinny little black square, or cross, right? So what I can do with this is I can take this and click and I'm holding my left mouse button and I'm dragging it down. And what that does, see, it automatically updated everything. So notice now in this row, it's D13 and E13, right? And the row below that, it's D14 and E14. I wouldn't have been able to do this if my data still looked like this. That's why that transpose function is key. And so now, you see what I've got, right? I've got the mean and the standard deviation for the males, and I didn't have to do a single piece of transcription. I don't have to round anything. I don't have to keep typing spaces and parentheses. I don't have to keep changing anything. And in fact, what's even nicer about this is that, let's say I realize that I made a mistake and I have to redo my analysis. Well, guess what? If I paste in an updated piece of information and, oh, you know what? I added 9 participants. So now I have 100 here, and this mean changes to like 55.75, blah, 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 whatever, right? Then this happens, and what I can then do is, again, I can just copy and paste this and transpose it again, and now see this automatically updates, right? Because it's still looking at cell D12. So you can do this as many times as you want, and you don't have to go in and change anything by hand. You avoid making mistakes by doing it by hand, and it rounds it off automatically for you. So hopefully you're starting to see the value in this. And now, what about the females, right? So I can go over here. So this is my M and SD for males, right? And now females, I can have the same thing, the mean and the standard deviation. But when I do that, I don't want to type all this over again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click here and I'm going to copy this text. I just hit Control C. You can just right click, copy, and then click in here and paste it. But I don't want D12 and E12, right? That's the males data. So I can click this cell and drag it over here because this is the mean for the females, and I can click this one and drag it over here. That's the K12 and L12. We see that it's K 12 and L12. You can also type it in if you want. You can make this, you know, J12 if you want, and you see that it highlights cell J12. But there's, I'm sorry, L12, not M. And there we see the female data, right? 5173 and 10.06, 10.0578 rounds up to 10.06. And again, I just drag this down, and there it is. And now this is what I would want to paste into Word. Word will not do any of this for you. All Word can do is take text and kind of, you know, play around with it. So that would be the next step. You know, you go into Word and play with it from there. So, right, we've gotten through these steps here. Now, within Word, there are also a couple of steps. You paste in your table, right? I just copied the text over from Excel. And then there's this very handy feature of viewing grid lines. And I'll show you how that works because it can get very tricky to try to find where the cells begin and end within the Word environment, so to speak. And there's also a very handy trick of this quick access toolbar. So I'll show you that too because this is a real time saver. As opposed to having to click 8 different times to get to one function that you want, you can add it to your taskbar very quickly and only have to find it once. And then you have to apply those bottom borders. We've seen in the APA formatted table that you have to have those borders everywhere. And then you have to insert intervening columns to separate bottom borders. We remember for the males and females, there's this requirement of having the separate borders according to what group you're in. Right? Remember, there's this gap here, right? So you have to insert a gap there, and that's how you would do that. Let's see here. We're in Word. Okay, and then you apply cell margins. If you want to align the text within a cell to the very left edge or the very right edge to make everything nice and aligned, I'll show you how to do that. So I just need to boot up a Word document. Oh, I sort of cheated and I was practicing this beforehand, so I'm going to start from scratch. Okay, so let's start a new document in Word. Okay, so, you know, yours probably isn't going to be blank. If you're writing a dissertation or something like that, you already have text in here, but that doesn't really matter. What I want to do, right, is I want to copy my table from Excel into into Word. And of course now I can add in, right, if we go back to this table in APA format, we know that there's all these other pieces of information. And the sample size is one and the confidence interval is another. We can calculate the confidence interval for any variable very quickly. I'm not going to do that right now, but if you did have the confidence interval, notice that it would be just another column to the right here. So if I were to insert a column here, right-click, insert, then you could have a 95% CI, and you could literally tell it, okay, give me the values from F12, right, and then drag it down, and you'd have your confidence interval here. Same thing for sample size. Right? If I want to have the sample size, I can say equals and give me this value here, right? Drag it down, and we've got all our information. So again, if I change this to like, okay, I gathered more data in this group, it's like 120, automatically updates itself down here. So fine, so I take this table, right? Oh, and well, obviously I want to know what variables these are, right? Haha. So this is the reading score. And notice, I said equals, it's not a number, right? It's text. Excel doesn't care. It just says, okay, whatever's in that cell, that's what I'm going to give you. And drag that down, and we've got all of our information here. Okay, so now I'm going to, well, fine, let's just say we have the 95% CI for the males as well. Obviously, this is not super accurate, but, and this I'm going to, again, round to two significant figures. I copy the entire thing. Copy that. I said Control-C. I didn't right-click copy, but whatever. You get the idea. And now I paste it in here. Now there are many different ways that you could paste it. See that every time I hover over one of these options, it changes the look of it. But for the most part, as long as you have a table that has cells in it, this is the best way to be sure that you have cells involved, is you kind of do this. And again, this is not APA formatted yet, right? We don't want all these different cell margins everywhere. We need everything to be on the same line. So what I actually want to do is I want to select the whole table by clicking up in the top left here. And under Table Tools up top, you have this Borders option. So I want no border. And now it's like, okay, this just looks like random numbers everywhere. But the trick is that you show the grid lines, and let me actually zoom in on this because we're done with these other programs for now. When I zoom in on this, I can go to View. No, I have to go to Table Tools. I have to click in the table, and you see that this Table Tools thing shows up, right? If I click in the text of the Word document, you know, here is the body of my text. And there's no option up here. But when I click inside the table, notice what happens. Table Tools pops up, right? So you click in here, and in different versions of Word, they change where things live. But what you have to do is go to this Design tab, and this is Word 2016. So under Borders, you see there's this View Grid Lines option, right? So I click on that, and now it shows me this grid that I can see as I'm working on the document. But when I go to print this document or save it as a Word document or a PDF, these grid lines don't show up, and that's what you want, right? All you want are those APA formatted borders. So that's what we're going to add in, and when we're done, you just unclick this option. Now, of course, you're going to be doing this a lot. So my recommendation is when you go into Table Tools and Borders and View Grid Lines, if you want to turn this off, you can keep doing that over and over and over again, or you can just right-click View Grid Lines, and then the first option is Add to Quick Access Toolbar. Now, I already have this. You see I've got a bunch of different buttons up here because this is the stuff that I use all the time. So that's what this button up here is. So anywhere I am in the document, I'm over here, it goes to the Home tab, I want to go to my table and I want to see those grid lines, one click away. And now it's easy for me to find where the borders of my cells are. So I can take this and drag it so that everything fits on one line. If you double click it, it automatically does it for you. You see how the icon changes from a little cursor to this like double vertical line with the arrows pointing outwards from it? If you double click that, it automatically changes the width to fit everything on one line. Same thing here, reading score, writing score, those are broken down, science score is broken down. Double click that, and it's starting to look like what we want it to look like. Now obviously you don't need your columns to be super wide. You can just double click here and it'll narrow things in. So this is what it starts to look like. And when you're putting together an APA formatted table, again, remember, you need a heading. So what you want to do is you want to right-click and, oh, that's interesting. Oh, because it's linked to my, right. This is, the version of pasting that I did is linked to the source document. This is actually something that isn't always a good idea, because if you change things around or if you save this file on a different computer, the link might be broken. So in fact, I wouldn't, like, if you feel like super confident in doing this, then go ahead. But otherwise, use a different form of pasting where you can keep the source formatting. And here, this is no longer linked to the original file. It's the same exact information, but now you actually have the numbers sort of living in Word as opposed to living in Excel and being pasted into Word. Now, this is a handy feature if you're confident with this, but I have seen it, I've seen those links break, and it's not fun because you think you're presenting one thing, you're presenting another, and you start to wonder what's happening, and that's potentially what can happen. So just be careful with this feature. Okay, but anyway, so here we are, right? The table needs a heading, so I want to right-click, Insert Rows Above, and this will let me type in, Table X, and Descriptive Statistics for males I'm sorry, these have to be capitalized. Dr. Patterson, am I right in that? These have to be capitalized, right? Every word is capitalized here.
That's correct. Title case for tables.
Right, and then this also has to be italicized, and what else? The font has to be consistent, so I don't know why it made it Times New Roman instead of Calibri, but okay, Calibri 11. Now, what I'm going to eventually do is I'm going to merge these cells. What happens is when you merge these cells, it turns into one, continuous row. I don't want to do that just yet, though, because if I want to play around with the widths of my columns, it gets screwed up if you try to do that, and the top row is one column, but everything else is like 6 columns. It tends to get tripped up. So in any case, I know that I need this entire thing to have a full underline, right? So I go back into Table Tools, and I go to Borders, and I make a bottom border, right? And now, when I hide these grid lines, see, that's still there, right? But because I want to know where my grid lines are for now, I'm keeping them visible. But when you go to have like a final version, that's all that shows up. Okay, so now we know that we need the males and females to have their own separate underlining, right? But if I take all the data for the males and give them a bottom border, then that directly abuts the females' data. Oh, you know what? I also forgot to insert a column to the left, and I need to grab the female sample size from here. And this is actually a great example because I can very quickly do this. I go back into Excel, I right-click and insert some cells, shift everything else to the right. Okay, all my female data moves to the right, and in here I just pop in the N, and let's see, where are my female data? Equals, here they are, K12. And I hit enter, and now I've got my 109, right? Drag that down. It's 109 for all of them. I need to get rid of those figures there. And now I can take this, copy it. And, we've got 4 rows here. This is easy with 4 rows. You're like, what's the big deal? What if you have a table with 10 rows, 20 rows? This becomes a lot more of a time saver. Anyway, okay, so I go back into Word. And I've got I thought I deleted this. Oh, right, because I undid. All right, go away. So now I can paste my data in here. One of these is going to be it. There we go. So I've got my sample size for the females. And again, all of these cells for the females also have to be containing a bottom border, right? But now, when I hide these grid lines, you see it's not split up, right? So how am I gonna add that extra space? And it's gonna drive me crazy. But the trick is, what you do is you see how this turns into this little like black down-facing arrow from a cursor? When that happens, you right-click it, and you insert a column to the left. You can also do this in Excel and paste the table that way, but whatever. That's the same difference. And now what I can do is this cell does not get a bottom border, so that goes away. And now you see I've split it up. And of course I can make this as narrow as I want so that it looks a little bit more pleasing to the eye. It's whatever you want. You can make it as well, not as wide as you want, but in any case you can play around with this, and if you want it to be even narrower, like right now it's keeping me from making it narrower, but that's because I have cell margins that are too wide. Okay, but now we're starting to get somewhere. And of course, last but not least, well, not last but not least, but this row has to have a bottom border. And finally, the bottommost row has to have a bottom border. And now we're basically done, except for the fact that we've got, some formatting to do. First of all, you'll notice that some of these cells are right aligned. So for example, this is right aligned where, everything is sort of hanging on to the right-hand side. This has to be left aligned. This is APA format here where it's left aligned, but notice that there's this gap, right, where the border starts here, at this sort of vertical position, is to the left of where the text starts. Like, what the heck's up with that? Well, what's going on is that the cell margins have to be fixed. What we're actually looking at is a cell that starts all the way over here, but it has a left-hand margin, like an indentation almost. So what you have to do if you want to change this is you go into here and then you go to Layout, and there's this button called Cell Margins. And when you click on that, you see that it says that the left-hand margin is 0.08 inches. So as I make this 0, now it's aligned. And you can do that for any cell that you feel like you want to do it to. So for example, in this cell here, I probably want to first of all align my text to the right, which is actually here. And now, this might be good enough. This might be where I want to be and just leave it at that. But I might want to have more control over it, in which case I might want to take this, change my cell margins to, on the right, be also 0. And that way it abuts the very right edge of the cell. And that's useful in some cases if you're really trying to get like in depth with like a really large table and you want to save space, blah, blah, blah. You don't necessarily have to do that. You can leave it as default and still be okay. The main thing for APA format is that everything is left aligned to where these horizontal borders are. Okay, now the only other thing, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. The only other thing that you have to keep in mind is that the headings are not left aligned, they're centered. You can do that from here, from the home button. There's a center option, and that takes care of that. Same thing for these folks here. You center that, and you're good to go. So now, if I'm happy with the way this table looks, I want to make this a little bit tighter here. So I'm just double-clicking on these borders, and it automatically fits the content of the cell. So when I do that, it starts to look a little bit better and not so scattered. However, stylistically speaking, you might want to, if you've got a large enough gap in here, you might want to sort of bring that in, right? So I can click on this border and do that, and then bring this in a little bit until it starts to collapse itself. So that's all stylistic details, but all those options are there for you, right? So now the last step I need to do is if I showed the grid lines again, this whole thing has to cut across the entire width of the table. So what I do here is I select all these cells, I right-click and I say Merge Cells, and then it turns that all into one big cell. And now, hide those grid lines, and guess what you've got on your hands? It's an APA formatted table. Hopefully you're starting to see that this looks a lot like this. This is the PowerPoint. This is the piece of page 130 from the APA manual that is now resembling the format that you need. And okay, sure, so these have to be italicized. Okay, fine. If you have a copy of the APA manual, great. If not, get one because it gives you all the information you need. So that is from start to finish how you would put together a table of descriptive statistics. Again, different analyses will have different pieces of information that you need, but the steps are the same. So any information you could ever want, you could tell Excel, if you have a big piece of SPSS output and it drags on all the way to somewhere over here, column U, and there's some value over here that's like, I don't know, the skewness of a variable, and it's negative 1.01 here, 1.2 here, 0.3 here, and 4.6 or 5.6 over here. But you want it to be over here, right? Because this is where all your data are that you're going to be adding. So you can select everything, insert a column, shift cells to the right, hit OK, and now here's my skew variable for the males, and I can say equals, go to wherever my data are, and grab that skewness value, and it will show up for you. Whoops. Right? So now this is, okay, so this is now rounded off, but okay, there's your two significant figures. So again, the same procedure holds no matter what kind of data you have. All right, so let's hop back into PowerPoint for a minute. And let's talk about inferential statistics. Okay, we talked about Excel. In Word, we have the borders. We've got the intervening columns to separate bottom borders, and we apply those cell margins. We did all that. For inferential statistics, this is relatively quick. So again, APA format, not the same as SPSS output, so we have to figure that piece out. The same logic of ampersands and quotation marks applies because we want to say, we want to include, like, if you're doing a t-test, you want to say, here's a t-statistic, here's a p-value. You need parentheses for that. You need commas. You need, symbols. All that kind of fun stuff can go inside those quotation marks. We're not going to have all the time in the world to go over this, but you should refer to pages 116 to 123 for the exact symbols that you would need to use for reporting inferential statistics. Oops. Okay, right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at SPSS again because that's how you do inferential statistics. So we've got our HSB data, right? So I described the males and females, but what if I want to know the differences between them, right? Are males and females significantly different on reading scores? We see that for males, the mean is 52.8 compared to females, it's 51.7. So is that a significant difference, or is it just due to, sampling error? Writing score, there's a bit of a bigger difference. It's 50.1 to 54, well, 55 if you round up. Math, they're about the same. And science, there's also a difference of about, 3 or 2.5 points, whatever it is. So we want to know, okay, are these significant differences? If I'm writing a research study on this, I'll probably want to know that. So, okay, go to Analyze, Compare Means, and we'll do an independent samples t-test on these data. So I want to test them on these 4 variables, right? Reading, writing, math, and science. So I click those over into test variable. And my grouping variable is the sex of the participants. So I have to define the groups first. Okay, group 1. I know that my codes are 0 and 1. You have to make sure that you type in the correct codes, because if not, then you're going to have an error. But if you go into variable view, you know that under this female variable, 0 is male and 1 is female. So that's what it's asking. If you had like a design with 3 groups, you might have another group where it's a value of 2. That's a third group, right? So 0, 1, and 2 would be, I don't know, something else. But in any case, I'm telling SPSS I want to compare group 0 and group 1. And I know that 0 corresponds to the males and 1 corresponds to the females. Oh, I forgot to unsplit my data file, right? Sorry. So I have to go to Data File, Split File, and Analyze All Cases, Do Not Create Groups. Okay, so now Split File is off. Now I run my t-test. Sorry about that. Compare Means and Samples t-test. All my info is in here. Okay. And now I get all of this information here. Right, these are my inferential statistics, and I'm interested in the p-value. Looks like under writing, it is a significant difference, right? That's a very small p-value. If you double click on this, it'll tell you what the exact number is. My computer's being very slow right now. But under writing, this value is 0.000246. Remember what I said about significant figures, right? If it's a really small number like this, you would just round this off and say, okay, p is less than 0.001. Which this is. It's 0.0002. So it's an order of magnitude smaller. Okay, but anyway, we want to take this entire table and very quickly and efficiently get our statistics for it. So I'm going to copy this over into Excel. Let's start a new sheet here. I want to paste this table in. And now what I actually want, now I don't need to transpose this because the way that SPSS outputs this information is it's already basically transposed. All my t values are in one column, all my degrees of freedom are in one column, and my p values are in one column. So that's what you need to report. According to APA format, that's and common sense and statistics, that's what you need to report. So what I do is, as you can probably imagine, I'm going to type in equals, right? And what value do I want? Well, first I want to tell Excel that I want to show a t-score. So t, and what you normally do is you report the degrees of freedom in your t-test. So it's t open paren, and now I want my degrees of freedom, right? So this is what the df column stands for, so I want F5 in this case. That's my reading score degrees of freedom. We got a writing score degrees of freedom, math, and science. Okay, so we want F5 in there. And then we want to close that parenthesis, right? So we go like this with a close paren. And so now we've got T of 198, right? See that? If I change this to 2,198, it updates itself down here, but it's 198. So we're not done yet. We also need to tell it that the T value equals something. So I say space equals space, close that parenthesis, and I want the actual T value now. So this is the T value. It's in column E, E5 for the reading score, right? And that's the test statistic. But we also have to report the P value. And the way that you do that is, you have to pop the P value. So and open a quotation, and it's comma space P equals space close paren, and then we take the P value, and P is in column G. So there's G5. And now, this is what we get. Okay, well, I forgot to tell it to round off, right? So again, round E5 to 2 digits, close that, and round G5 to 2 digits, close that. And now I've got my test statistics. So essentially, it's the same trick as before. Remember, you click that bottom right-hand corner when it turns into that skinny black cross, you drag it down, and you end up with a bunch of results. Now, in SPSS, you get 2 t-tests every time you run a t-test. We're not necessarily interested in this equal variance is not assumed version of the t-test, so I can just go in and delete every other one, right? And now I've got all my sort of raw t-tests here. And that's it. You can take this, copy it into Word, and you would say, the effect of gender on reading scores was not statistically significant, right? And then I say, and then I paste in that text. And I don't have to transcribe anything. It's done automatically for me. The only thing you need to do, this is something that Excel doesn't do. Word is good at processing text. You have to italicize the T and the P scores. And one other thing, p-values don't get a 0 in front of the period. Any value, in fact, in statistics that can only go up to 1 does not get a 0 in front of the period. So here, now what you can do is, you have your prose, you have 4 tests, so then you can paste in, the effect of gender on writing scores, and then I go back and I say, okay, well, was it significant? Writing is the second one. And yeah, that's a pretty big effect, right? So I copy this, and this actually was significant. So I can just basically, replace all this. And notice that P equals 0. Well, that is a rounding error. Remember, that's a very small P value. So this you might want to do by hand. Anytime you have a really small P value like this, you have to say, okay, well, it's not actually 0, it's less than 0.001. And again, italicize. And now you've basically automated the whole process, and you can do it all in these very methodical, sort of almost robotic ways. Remember that writing in academic writing is not meant to be in flourishes, meant to be systematic and very sort of dull almost, where you're kind of repeating the same thing over and over again, almost, except you're saying, well, guess what? One effect was not statistically significant, another one was. The real payoff is in the fact that you've now learned that there are these differences across males and females. So that is especially the creative part, is designing the study, finding your results, and writing it up is the sort of least creative thing of the whole process. But hopefully this presentation helped you with putting all of this together. So again, it's the same logic, and you've got the information you need. I do have time. I know that we went over by a couple of minutes, but remember, you can always get those slides through OneDrive. You have that in the chat window here. You can email me to get a copy of the slides if you can't access it for whatever reason. If you want to discuss your data analysis, and any of the issues that we've discussed today, or that I've discussed today. If there are questions, obviously let's chat offline if you have to go now. But if you have more in-depth questions about APA format, that's where Dr. Patterson can come in, and these are the emails for the DWEs in general. If you want help with your dissertation specifically in terms of APA formatting, or if you have specific questions, certainly feel free to reach out. This is my phone number at the office here. So any way you want to get in touch, please feel free. And if there are any other questions, I will end the presentation.